Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the podcast with Connie and Lottie on Alaska real estate. Obviously, Lottie is not here, but her partner, Mike James, is. They've been partners for 25 years with a handshake. That's right. Our guest today is someone that's very special, and he's going to give us a lot of information and a lot of insight into the Mat-Su Borough. So welcome, Mike Brown. You are the manager of the Mat-Su Borough. Did I get that right?
Yeah, right.
All right. Okay. Which, for those of you that may not know, is as large and a little bit larger than West Virginia, the state of West Virginia. So I'm sometimes thinking I should call you the governor.
No, much different role there.
Much different role there. So, coming from Anchorage and coming out here and doing an investment, it was very confusing in terms of what's the role of the Mat-Su Borough, what's the role of Wasilla and Palmer as a city, because that's sort of different than what we've been used to working in Anchorage. So maybe we can begin by explaining that.
Yeah, that's great. And so we probably have some folks that have the lower 48 kind of model background. So, for folks that don't understand what a borough is, it's similar to a county in the lower 48. So the way it kind of evolves, as I see it, when you look at what a borough is kind of that county level government. And the idea is that you organize around a geographic boundary so that you can provide a set of services. The way we're organized is that's a limited set of services, right? And then what that allows for is when you have population centers that begin to grow up, like Palmer, Wasilla, Houston, you can even see it some of the communities, Talkeetna, Big Lake. What happens is they grow, mature, and in some cases choose to incorporate. And there you have your cities. And I think what's great about that approach to governance is it allows people to choose, right? So around the borough, we're going to offer a limited set of services where you have these population centers that grow up and want more services. They choose to incorporate, and then they determine for themselves what they want that service set to look like. And I think that's a pretty good model. That's what works for us. What's a little bit different in Anchorage is that you have essentially a unified government. The borough and the city are one and the same. And so you see that in a couple of places around the state. But we are what they call a second-class borough. That may kind of sound funny at face value, but what it really means is we are a limited form of government. So we're not intending to be everything to everyone.
Is that a problem with emerging cities in terms of how they finance some of their services then when they become a city?
Yeah, so they have to figure that out. And so what you see for Palmer has a sales tax and they have a property tax. Wasilla's chosen a different model where they've elected not to have the property tax, but they have a sales tax and they live on those revenues. And then Houston has a little bit of both. And so that's the beauty of it. When you incorporate, you set up for yourself how you want to do that, what services you want to offer, and how you choose to pay for that. And obviously, you see here in Wasilla, they've chosen to be a commercial hub, and a sales tax has worked to help fund the government because of the style they choose. Palmer obviously is a bit different, and so because you don't have the same amount of commerce, probably not going to generate the same amount of sales tax. So you're going to have to look at other options to diversify your tax base.
How about with the borough, the demands you see out services from the cities? As you're looking, maybe not as Houston as much, but more Palmer, Wasilla. Where you go through, would you see them wanting the borough to provide water and sewer? Or you might see a connection between the two. You might see some economies of scale where you can bring everybody in between the unincorporated areas, let's say between.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think from a development perspective, water and wastewater infrastructure is one of the drivers, like in terms of higher density development. And so I think what we look at, there are some services we provide on an area-wide basis. That's the terminology we use, like schools. Probably doesn't make sense to have 3 or 4 school districts out here, right? It just creates some inefficiency. So we do that on an area-wide basis. There are some other things we do on an area-wide basis, like emergency medical services. So that's unified and we provide that throughout. But when you get to like fire service, it's different, right? You have a fire department at Palmer that provides that for the city of Palmer. Wasilla has chosen to be part of a fire service area that the borough has. Yeah. And so again, people can choose different approaches depending on what they want that to look like. But certainly wastewater is one of those that we're working on. We've chosen to work together and kind of cooperate on that. I think it's more likely to see the two systems grow toward one another than it is to go and have the borough develop a separate system and kind of run its own plant. And the challenge for that is simply just geographic, right? I mean, we have a large space to cover, and water and wastewater infrastructure, I mean, it's all linear feed. Like, I mean, you have to have pipe and plants. That's what makes it expensive. Probably not in the best interest of folks out here to have another utility to add on to what's already there. So I think what's more likely to happen is the two growing towards one another within the core area between the two cities.
Or there's trouble that comes at intertie between the two.
Yeah, we look for ways to help support that. We did put some money into post-COVID. There were some opportunities to invest in water and wastewater infrastructure. We provided grants to both cities with the intent of developing booster stations and kind of pushing that water infrastructure toward, for Wasilla East and Falba West. And that was the intent, is to kind of try to find ways to incentivize that or encourage it, so that that infrastructure can be developed. And I mean, there are examples from a residential perspective where there's some subdivisions now that can go in on half-acre lots because they have access to city water, whereas before they would either have to have a community well in or just run with the standard water of the lot.
You'd be able to see what's the cheap cost here. Where you'd be able to come and see whether to do the cost of your lot.
Well, what it does to the cost of your lot, if you have water and sewer and you have to put in those pipes, your cost of a lot is going to be the same as what it is in Anchorage. And I don't think the Mat-Su Valley is quite ready for a $185,000 lot that's 50 foot wide, which is basically what we're doing. Anchorage has lost a lot of population to the Mat-Su. 6,000. You have 3 times the number of single family homes, maybe depending on how you calculate it, maybe 4 times when you're covering just single family homes. And you have over 50% of all the new builds for homes in the state of Alaska. What do you attribute all that growth to? Besides land, we know you have 25,000 square miles of land, but what do you, in addition to that, what do you attribute?
So we'll set the geography aside, because that's obviously number one. But to have land availability, I guess I just recognize that we are, I guess for lack of a better, we're blessed in that way. Like, I think that's an important recognition that, we just have land availability. But there are many other things that I think contribute to why people might choose one over the other. And I think I talked about one a little bit. I think we run a limited form of government. I think there are folks out here that prefer that. They don't want to see higher taxes. They're okay with operating with limited services as long as they're the right services. I think you see we're kind of predisposed to local choice. And I think I would say that, giving examples of, like, you have a number of communities throughout the valley. Right, I mentioned Talkeetna, I mentioned Big Lake already. You've got communities down in the Point McKenzie, Connect Goose Bay area, and then of course the cities themselves. But there's plenty of other communities where you can kind of make choices for, like, what do you want to be around, right? And what do you want to be a part of? And so I think the local choice component, because we don't operate at the borough with a heavy hand where we're like, no, everybody's got to be one and the same, and it's one size fits all. And so we recognize that every community has different ideas, and that's okay. And we do a lot of that by coordinating with local community councils. So that's one way where we can get that local input. I think when you get a broader range of services, to some degree, there's a bit more regulation that comes along with that. And I think that's definitely one of the things that distinguishes the two communities from one another. I think it's fair to say, and I don't think it's surprising to anyone, we have less regulations and less of a regulatory framework. And I think that appeals to some.
Can I bring you an example?
Absolutely.
So I have a subdivision in Cedar Park. It's 83 lots just south of the Old Glen. It's still within the city limits. And I needed to extend my subdivision agreement. And so I asked Gary LaRusso to do that for me. And I got my extension in like 3 days from the submittal. It would have taken me 4 or 5 months to get that in the municipality of Anchorage, because it would have to go to the plating board and there have to be a record, and then they would have to present it at the plating board. So that's really a very, very good example. And I think builders and developers appreciate the fluid way that you could accomplish those things, because time is money when it comes to residential land development. So about these 57,000 cars that go back and forth.
Yeah.
who's in those cars? Because I think your demographic has changed quite a bit out here.
Yeah, I think it's fair to see it shifting. I mean, we see a lot more businesses locating out here than maybe in the past. I mean, the easiest one, I think, just looking at Seward Radio Parkway, to look at the professional services, medical care that's available out here. I was telling one of my daughters just the other day, I was like, what I used to have to go to Anchorage for, I can now do out here. And so it is nice to see some of those businesses start to, some of them might start out with a satellite office and then it may grow into something else. We've seen it from civil engineering firms and other professional service providers that are now seeing that, they have a lot of their workforce that's living out here. Post-COVID, they don't necessarily want to commute anymore. Like that 10 hours a week is meaningful to them. And so I think you're seeing some businesses choose, and even state agencies choose, to house those folks out here in terms of office space so they can actually be working in the community that they live in. And that's certainly a quality of life consideration.
So let's throw this to you, Mike.
Well, before you say that, I must say it would be even more interesting on that, the cars driving. How many cars are now driving to the valley?
I have heard of some reverse commuting. I can't tell you to what degree that happens, but certainly if you were going to choose to commute, the reverse commute would be the way to do it. So you're not working with all the other traffic. You're kind of.
But what shortest times are to get up here?
Absolutely. I would say the same thing about getting into Wasilla. When you set this up, I was like, this is a good time.
This is a good time. Exactly. So is there enough office space here? Bye.
No. You need more Class A office space. Class B, that's been right. They don't have in Class A. As you start seeing the maturing of the city and the borough, as you start looking at, Wasilla has, a lot of the offices were built here in the 80s, the go-go years. And so now you're starting to see the new retail developments coming in, like Sun Mountain, and that's starting to get filled in. And once the hotels finish, and if really that could be much more landing. I'm starting looking for new projects now here. But office space is going to be premium out here, especially as we start going through and you becoming nor maybe even an industrial center out here. Because, in Anchorage, a lot of our industrial areas are becoming retail areas. Our whole C Street corridor, that was I-2, is now a Target and a Cabela's. So as we work out here in the valley where you've got so much room to be able to go through and have these quarters. If we're going to build an LNG pipeline, we're going to build it. It's probably not going to be in Anchorage. It probably will be at Fairbanks in the borough. We've been to Mat-Su Borough.
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting things is we see development occur out here, whether it's commercial. I mean, we've talked residential a little bit, but commercial or industrial that's one of the things. We'll just say the Z word and get it out right here. We don't have zoning, right? I think we have, I guess if you wanted to say general use zoning within the borough, but we don't have that zoning where the government's telling you what's going to go where. And so some of that occurs as, the business takes it. And I think there's some criticisms we receive as well. You don't have that. You should have that. We should have all that laid out. And so that I would say it's not that we don't plan or that there aren't things that you have to do to kind of dot the I's and cross the T's to develop something. It's just, you don't really have the government telling you how it's going to look, right? Like we don't have a map that says it's going to be like this. And I think there's value in that. And I think if you were to talk to probably most folks, they probably would prefer that approach. And maybe it's a little bit different than what other municipalities are doing. I think it is. But you look at what's happened in other municipalities that are, let's just say, older, more mature than we are, hasn't always ended well. And so I don't know, you kind of look and say, this is the model we've chosen. And certainly there are places where we might want to have areas that are set up for special use. And we have some provisions for doing that. But because we don't have that like area-wide zoning, a lot of it is where does the business, where are people choosing, and where does that take that development?
So Houston is a good example of no zoning. Yeah, a business can come in, build a 6-story office building or whatever, and then the rooftops come after that. Generally speaking, I think rooftops come first and they generate the commercial and the retail and all of that sort of thing. But I can tell you, obviously, because I work in Anchorage in land development, that the municipality of Anchorage is trying desperately to unzone some of their properties. They went from an R1 zone to an R2 zone. They just blanketed it and said everyone now can have a duplex, They're working to rezone or upzone the transit corridor, all the property around the transit corridors and that sort of thing. So they're trying very hard to be competitive, but not very successfully. I know I think everybody is aware of that. So you have a great opportunity. So what are your plans for the future? I was at the Mat-Su DOT fair just the other day on the Raven building, and I was there for a specific purpose. But that hall, which is quite large, was full of all the things that are happening in the Mat-Su. How do you keep track of all that?
Yeah. Well, I think the obvious number one problem that we have to, I don't want to say solve, it's just a problem we have to continue to work on, or an issue, is transportation. You look through the heart of Wasilla here as you come into Parks Highway, it's a problem. There's no doubt about that. The Glen Highway traffic, it's an issue. But more importantly, it's all of that, all those roads that connect and bring relief to those areas, right? Where people shop, where people do business. And we're seeing progress, but new road connections or even upgrades to existing road connections don't happen overnight. We are seeing, I'm glad to see Seward Meridian Parkway now should get wrapped up this summer. Connect Goose Base had some good improvements, or some more improvements to come, which has helped really improve that. The Glen Highway into Palmer. So there are some good movement on some of those key corridors. We definitely got some work to do on the Bogart-Selden corridor. We see that, and you see the development and what's happening there with traffic. So we're going to continue to have to chase those things, just because the transportation development does to some degree tend to lag the development. Just because are you going to go in and spend millions of dollars to upgrade a corridor before the development's happened? And that sounds like a novel idea, but where does that money come from? That's fundamentally the issue. So we've still got a lot of work to do there. By no means are we, have we gotten in front of that? I don't know that we will, but we continue to make progress, I guess, is the encouragement.
So with all these roads, it took me a while to figure out going from Palmer to Wasilla. Then I had several choices and how I was going to get there. Where does that money come from to build all these roads?
Yeah, great question. Multiple sources. A lot of it comes from federal sources. So DOT, for the bigger road corridors, DOT uses the federal highway funds. And they do that through a thing called the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program, or the STIP, correct? So that's been heavily leveraged for years. What's changed since the 2020 census is the borough now has what we call Metropolitan Planning Organization, or an MPO, which is something Anchorage and Fairbanks have had for years. That allows us to participate in how some of those federal highway funds are directed within the borough. So that's a good thing, because the cities of Palmer, Wasilla, and the borough now have a vote on how those dollars get used, and we can use them on some of our local roads. So that's very helpful, because before we couldn't access that. So that gives us the third area, which is these transportation bonds. And so we would put out ballot propositions whereby voters would then vote, and we would be able to leverage bonds to be able to improve transportation infrastructure. So local roads predominantly, and that's been helpful too. But I think the MPO is going to buy a little bit of capacity moving forward. By no means is it fix everything, but it does bring some capacity for road improvements that we did not have in the past.
In some roads you may not have control, but how about parts out of it running through Wasilla? It's a state road. You're not going to be able to. It's same thing as you look at the Glen coming through. But I'm assuming Palmer, Wasilla though is a borough road or not a state.
It is a state road.
So you only have.
Yeah, correct. And what we're looking at is some of the new connections. So when you look at, if you can remember back, because it's been a few years now, but the Bogart extension between Palmer High School and College High School, there was no connector there, right? So we had to build that. Clapmac did not have a connector down to KGB from up here on the parks, right? So those are good examples of where you want to build new connections that provide alternate ways to get there, because that's the key. It really needs to be a grid. And so that you have multiple choices or options to get from point A to point B. And then some of it is upgrading existing roads, like we see a lot of traffic and congestion on Engstrom, right? And that Bogart and Engstrom intersection comes up time and time again. So certainly, or other roads like Trump Road or something, or Palmer Wasilla Highway, where you see a lot of residential development driving your trip traffic. or your traffic counts, and then you need to upgrade those roads to handle the additional capacity and improve those intersections so that they're safe and function.
We were talking earlier, one was, will they ever take Palmer Wasell and Bogart and make them a one-way road and then have interconnections in between?
I don't think so. I think that would be problematic for a number of reasons, I think.
Kind of expand it. Well,
The Palmer Wasell is kind of locked in. I think your best bet is to create a better grid. Like, don't try to, build it into a superhighway. Just create more connections and create more opportunities to take some of the traffic off of those roads, where before you would have to go between, two major roads on the Hollow Wasilla before you could get off of it. And so I think making those improvements is where you're going to, and that's what you see us doing, the Bobar-Selton corridor, building that out, trying to find some relief valves to go north and south. I mean, like Seward Meridian was really one of the first larger north-south connectors we've had.
That's a great job, you guys.
Yeah, and that was in conjunction with DOT. That was actually a DOT road, and we used federal highway dollars to build it, and then the borough maintains it now. And so some of what we got to do out here, too, as we mature as a community is right-size that. Like, DOT is really well suited for highways. The borough is really suited for local roads. So there are some cases where DOT has local roads and we have highways. So we need to kind of sort that out over time and kind of like stick to what we're good at doing. And so, potentially someday Seward Meridian could go back to DOT, but then we take some of the local roads off their plate.
Stay within your lane.
Yeah. Using a road analogy. Very good.
Let's talk about population growth and the type of population that you have. I mean, 20 years ago, the Mat-Su was considered a pretty much blue-collar area where you could build a house for $300,000, 3 beds, 2 baths, single with double cup garage. Now you're building $800,000 houses, $600,000, and $1 million plus houses. Most of the $1 million plus houses are on lakes or pilot airstrips and that sort of thing. But your demographic has changed significantly. Is that a plus? Is that a burden? Talk to us about how that can affect the borough.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a plus or a negative. Like, our job is to adjust to the community, not the other way around. I think that's what...
Well, it's sort of refreshing to hear, really, frankly.
But I think that's fundamentally one of the issues we have with government, isn't it? Is government's like, you're going to do it this way, and people are like, we don't. I mean, we're even having it now, this conversation about school closings.
School.
Yeah, and so, and I think that's relevant because what you're seeing is people are choosing to educate their children in a certain way because we've provided those choice options, right? So they're choosing different. Now we have to adapt our law. And I think that's true across the board. Like, things change. And as things change, we've got to figure out as a government, whether it's us, the school district, or the cities even, how do we adapt to that? And I think, we see that. I think we provide choice. We give people those options. So like, for Big Lake, for example, because Big Lake's changed pretty significantly because it used to be Big Lake. Now it's Big Lake with a lot of the Anchorage folks out here recreating, buying large houses, right?
Yes.
Building. And so you look at that and you go, it's changing the demographics of that community pretty quickly. And, that's interesting to see what that's going to do and how do we adapt to that. I suppose someday Big Lake will probably outgrow the borough. And will probably choose to incorporate, right? Because then they can then determine for themselves what they want their service center to look. And I just use that as an example because it's an interesting one where you have a lot of folks from Anchorage now adding influence into that area.
I wish I would have kept my house on the North Shore. I sold it about 1 year ago.
But you're seeing people retire. So now what would before just weekend cabins, people coming up and enjoying the weekend and then going home. Now you're actually seeing people living here that have sold their house in Anchorage and choose to live on the lake. And that's what kind of interesting is the demographic that you get coming into this. It gets to be a little bit more affluent in an area that was a little tough. Sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think since COVID, the work from home and the technology improvements to allow people, or just the expectations around allowing people to do that's changed a lot. A lot of things where, so like we talked to our local telcos about how we continue to support broadband expansion and things like that, because that creates the opportunity to do that. And maybe you might be able to do that from Willow, whereas before you wouldn't even have considered that. Maybe where you're working 3 days from home, 2 days in an office, and your commute's not down. I mean, it's just creating options now for people that didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago.
Well, I have to congratulate you because you got one of my very good employees because she didn't want to make the drive to Anchorage every day or even twice a week. So Emily Gorn, I think you know it.
Oh,
Yes, she
I
was
just saw Emily this morning.
right. She was my marketing director, and you stole her. You got her.
about that.
But it was about the drive, literally. Yeah, it really was about the drive. Yeah.
Yeah, she's fantastic, Sarah. You know? But yeah. You are like,
And I think, and I don't know how much time we have left, but I was sitting in a conference a few years ago and we were talking to some different folks about, different communities across the state. And I mean, you talk about the demographics of the workforce and stuff. So we obviously have a large North Slope
Yes.
sector that works here. I think one thing I didn't really give much consideration to that I learned about then was, we're becoming a hub community for the Alaska Native population, like folks that want to come in. And that really got me to thinking too, along with folks that are moving out from Anchorage, because you look at Anchorage and you're like, well, you have access to all the services you could want. If you're going to get it in Alaska anyway, right? It's going to be in Anchorage, a mail-in-one Anchorage as opposed to anywhere else. But I think what struck me when we were sitting there talking with all of these things is the boroughs where your standard of living meets your quality of life. Like that's what makes this special. And I'll explain it just a little bit, because people want access to certain services. Like you want access to medical services. That's what's going to bring people in from the bush communities. You're going to want education services. You're going to want student activities, sports, all these other things for your kids, right? So that's that standard of living kind of conversation. But then at the same time, you want a lifestyle that isn't urban. You want space. You want to be able to go out and do outdoor recreation, right? You want to do it where it still feels natural, right? Where it's not in a building, it's not curated or whatever. And I think what you have in the boroughs, you can get both of those things, right? So you see the service sets out here growing. You're still on a road system. You're close to Anchorage. You're close to the airport. I mean, we jokingly say the only reason to go to Anchorage now is airport.
In the airport.
Yeah, it's in it, right? And so, and it's kind of a joke, but it's kind of true.
well, even have a horse barn and just take your horse after work and just leave your get on the trail and just leave your house. Same as whether it's just wishing you or full wheel.
And I think people appreciate the small town character or that rural character, and you can still get that. So like, if you want to be in more of a setting like I use, because it's like up the fish hook area, right? So if you want to get up, you see what's happening at Ski Talk. That's definitely going to be an economic driver, right? So it creates this opportunity to access a ski community. And you see some of the development that's now occurring near there, right? And so people could choose that type of a location. But then you go around the borough, you go to the Butte, you go to different places, and you're like, choose for yourself. Like you get the character of these smaller communities, but you still have access to the standard of living, right? So that's the idea of standard of living, quality of life, because I think we've always had a pretty good quality of life. And I think we've had a reasonably good standard of living, but now I think you're seeing other people that recognize that. So, you're even, like I already mentioned, the North Slope workforce, right? You have folks commuting from Anchorage, but now you have these folks coming in from villages in different places. And I think you could choose, right? And it's vast enough that you can spread out and I mean, even going to Willow, like it's fantastic up there.
Yeah, it is.
It's like, I'm not sure I wouldn't live up there, but that's a little bit farther of a drive to Palmer than I will want right now. But I mean, just to think about, what you have access to out here, it's pretty remarkable.
Well, if you look at the expansions of services at Consibu College, rare examples look at South Central Foundation. I mean, I don't know the size, but it looks like we're almost double in that building. And that's going to get various doctors, nurses, technicians. That's right. All high-paying jobs. Right. You saw the expansion of the hospital here years ago on what they've done and filled up. I mean, we're getting...
And they're expanding again now, behavioral health. It's got a significant need.
Yeah, that's right. I saw that. And you're hearing radio advertisements and for come out of Anchorage to come be a physician or a nurse or technician here at the hospital in Palmer. But we're now all of a sudden, instead of like having to commute from here to Anchorage and having that extra hour, now I'm living on Big Lake and I'm a technician at South Central, and it's a 20-minute drive. That's right.
So what kind of more housing do you think you need in this area?
Well, I would say the market's going to determine that, right? We're not dictating it. I think what we try to do is stay in a position to support whatever it is that's coming. I mean, obviously, you know, we've seen a lot of multifamily develop here in the near term. I think that's because the market's been demanding it for a while. But yeah, we're not in a position where I could tell you what that should look like necessarily. And I think
I couldn't wrap my head around that because that's not how it is in Anchorage, quite frankly.
just I guess part of the challenge was saying government knows what that answer is. The tough thing there is, well, what if you're wrong? And I think what you described earlier, where you're going in and changing zoning maps, is a recognition that something you laid out isn't actually what worked. And I don't think we're in a position, I don't think our policymakers want to be in a decision where we're dictating that. And so I think to answer your question, I will say, well, that it's probably a better question for you to answer because you're in the market.
How about Bill condos?
No, I think there could definitely be a market. But yeah, and I think some of that, the challenge of some of the higher density development is cutting all back to the water, wastewater. Like I think that's a significant challenge for us because it's such an expensive endeavor. But I think ultimately, if you really want to do that, and and we've talked about ways to interconnect the two systems, it requires the willingness of Palmer and Wasilla because they own the systems. But I could see some real value in that. I mean, just from a higher density development, but also just for commercial development with the fire code requirements, to go in there and having to put in storage tanks and things like that. It's cost. So if there's a way that we can continue to expand infrastructure, I think it could really help economically to kind of allow things to develop in a way that otherwise might be more limited.
I'm sure Mike has some questions that he wants to ask you. That my final question to you is, where are the homeless? I don't see them. I live in downtown Anchorage. I see them every day. I work in Midtown. I see them every day on every street corner. And I come out here and I don't see them. But yet I do know you have a homeless population of sorts.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We actually had those questions come up a lot during mid-December windstorms here this past year. Like, what are you doing? And again, I go back to this idea of a second-class borough. Like, we have legal authorities to do some things, and we don't have the authority to do other things. Housing actually isn't one of our authorities, right? So we don't have a housing department. We don't do health. We don't do sheltering. Like, there are some things that we don't have any legal authority to do. And I had to share that information with a couple folks that were questioning why we weren't doing more. And that there's absolutely a homeless population out here. There's no question about that. I think some of the challenges are, because we're more spread out and we don't have the density of services, you're not going to see them congregate as much because there's, like, what we see in Anchorage to some degree is they congregate around some of those things, services that they are looking to have access to. And out here, that's just more spread out. So I think it makes it a little bit harder. As far as a borough government goes, we don't spend a lot of time addressing the homeless issues because we don't have the legal authority. We don't resource staff to focus in on those issues. And that's just the reality. Voters could choose to change that in the future, but that's not where we are today. And so we stay in our lane for the things that voters have told us to go and do. Down the line, they might choose to tell us to do it differently and add some scope to our services. But I also would say that's why you have cities that can incorporate too, right? So when you look at that kind of maturing of government, you can choose like the borough framework, and then where you want to overlay or services where people are choosing to do that, that's what's really well suited for a city.
In Anchorage, we have the Rasmussen Foundation, but out here you have the Mat-Su Health Foundation, and I understand it is well funded to the Rasmussen Foundation. Does it play a major role in services out here?
Absolutely. They do a lot of great things for this community, and they do it in an area that we're not operating. Right. So it's not
real different.
Right. Because if we both had the same scope and we're overlapping, you might ask yourself, well, then how do you make that complementary and not competitive, or make it more completing? And because the borough's not operating in that space, I think the Health Foundation is able to in a way that we can't. And frankly, they have access to a funding source that we don't. Right. And so I think they do a lot of great things in the cities and within the borough that is very helpful. And so our role there is to figure out how we work together to do the,
So you have the overlapping of jobs. How many executive directors do you need doing the same job, or you to go through how can I help support you? You're handling this, that too. How can we as a borough help you, but not compete with you.
Right. And I think our approach, because, and I think it actually bodes well for us. I mean, some people might look at it and see it as limiting. I think it's great that we don't have everything we need to do everything we might want to do. So we have to choose to rely on partnerships. And so we choose to partner to get a lot of things done. And I can use like parks and recreation, easy stuff. Like we have over 1,000 miles of trails out here. Yeah. We had to do something. And we do some maintenance in the summer, but obviously in the winter, you need to groom them. But we don't groom them. We provide grants to nonprofits that do this trail grooming in various communities across the valley. So we don't need to hire the workforce and buy the equipment and staff all of that. We just choose to let people do it that are wanting to do it anyway. And we just kind of give them a helping hand because they want to do it anyway. And when you look at the geography, like you can't be everywhere all the time. So the partnerships, I mean, that's one small example, but there are multiple places where we just choose partnerships to do things. I mean, here in Wasilla, we have a partnership with Alaska Small Business Development Corporation. So we don't do that work, but we help them do the work that they do to help small businesses grow. And example after example, we could go through tourism and how do we do tourism marketing outside the state. Again, we partner with an organization that already does that. Don't do that in-house.
This is an amazing difference how between Anchorage and what you're doing out here as far as partnerships are concerned.
Well, and I think it's what this community wants. They don't want bigger government and they don't want more property taxes. And so I think in the end, you got to figure out how can you do with what you have and still get a lot done. And the reality is you can. There are a lot of nonprofits and for-profit groups out here that are already willing to operate space and do things that government could do, but they're choosing to do it. And it's like, well, let's figure out how we can help each other get there, whether it's through things like small grants or whatever that helps. I mean, like just look at what's happening in the Hatcher Pass area. So we have the government Peak Rec area, which has like kind of your cross-country skiing, and we run that facility as a recreational facility. And we have the chalet up there that provides a great venue for different things. And then just up the road in the same management area, Ski Talk, which is a nonprofit, setting up and really setting us up for a beautiful long-term facility to support the valley out here. Another thing you won't need to go to Anchorage for. And they're doing that work as a nonprofit in the same general area that we're operating, and it is not competing in any way. And I think that's a much better model than us trying to expand that services. We kind of stick to what we do well. That's our niche, and we just stay with that.
The numbers reflect that. You look at your limited service, I won't say what service you provide, but you're not being overbearing, to say what government. The numbers justify it, and you look at the number of housing, like we've talked about earlier, 3 or 4 times the amount that are coming up here. Then all of a sudden, here comes the commercial because we had a building like Sears for so long.
Good. Tell us the story.
Right?
Tell us.
So about a property that had been a Walmart that it became a Sears, and then just nationally Sears, the things that had worked for them, so it got shut down, and that just kind of becomes an eyesore after a while. Yeah. And then we have a local that comes in, Big Cabot with Sadler's, and reimagines this into a facility that that goes through as a furniture mall, that with all the different, the Ashley, the Sadler's, the Mat-Su they've got up here, it's following the housing because everybody that buys a house seems to buy a loose house. I knew a lawnmower. So, and that's what you start saying, like, with the Target here, when that happened, they took down.
It's a huge building out Target there.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just, you're seeing, of course, the only thing, what I'm thinking about is, if we're talking is, like, Wasilla is almost kind of becoming like Anchorage. The infill, you're getting filled up. Almost we have to start looking at, do you do demo? Because, the borough is so big, but the actual geographic footprint, Palmer and Wasilla is only so big. And so now if we're going to come in with a new...
As they're defined today.
Right. So, I mean, as they keep growing, as they're growing towards each other, but that's where the opportunities are for a new development of a new Sun Mountain's almost full. So as you go to create another Sun Mountain or another power center up here with retail, where are they going to go? Well, it's not going to be in the cities. It's going to be, as it is today, it'd be outside of the geographic boundaries right now. And then how does that work because you have, it's the zoning that we have out here, the unincorporated areas, limited zoning, but it does protect the developers and the homeowners Here's their board because they're not doing resource extraction and other things. Sure, but you're going to come through it. Kinnick, Goose Bay, Palma, Seward Meridian, the Trump. Those are all areas where you got to start seeing some, I would say, demand on commercial development, whether it's grocery stores, more retail. That's what I see kind of happening in those areas. Those will be your next bigger targets. And then, of course, there's always the not in that backyard. People don't want a huge development next to their house, but that's what's going to slowly start happening. And you're not going to be in acres, but it's as you've grown. I mean, I think when I looked at where size of West Bridge near, but the population is, that's like 90% is about 15 minutes of the settlers. We take that, it's about the majority of the population in Mat-Su Borough is about a 15-minute drive time.
I would have thought it's a little lower, but it's substantial. Yeah, for sure. Because that's the core area is probably 70,000 plus.
But you still have to maintain all these other areas.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's one of the interesting things. I mean, some stuff we do on an area-wide, a lot of things we do on a service area basis, right? So when you get into roads, we have 16 road service areas. We don't do any roads on an area-wide like Anchorage might do. They don't really, I guess, do it because they do have some road service areas as well, but they're right. Fire service would do the same way. So yeah, the level of service because of that construct varies. What you can get in Trapper Creek is as a service is going to be different than what you experience in Meadow Lakes or Dow KGP because of the service areas, right? They're not all funded the same. They are based on the tax base for whatever that geographic boundary is. And so for fire service and road service, it's going to impact the local service that those folks get. Now, some services like EMS, it's area-wide. We can fund it area-wide, but we also follow the demand, right? We don't just put ambulances everywhere. We go where the demand drives the resource. Otherwise, it would be cost prohibitive, right? And so arguably that level of service is going to vary too. And I think the choice you're making when you select communities sometimes is recognizing what those response times or levels of service might be and how they may vary from one area into another. And I think that's just a consideration anyone makes when they choose to buy, right? I mean, you do it when you choose your traveling time. Do I want to live 10 minutes from whatever that's the store or where I work, or do I want to live a half an hour? So there's trade-offs. It's like anything.
So actually, anecdotally, I can tell you that the Mat-Su Borough bought the piece of property at the corner of Marsh Road and the Oakland Highway for that ENS station. So what you're telling me, I sold that because I owned it. And so what you're...
We appreciate that.
Yeah, I think I sold it too low, but that's all right.
We're happy about that.
Yeah, sure. Happy too. But what you're telling me is strategically, that's a growth area. Yeah, it is because you don't have those services in that area.
And that's a good point because where our EMS station, where that ambulance is housed out of today?
No.
It's in the Palmer Industrial Park.
Oh.
Why does the government own a building in the industrial park? That is not the best spot. So what we are going to do when that new station is built, one, it is staged. It doesn't change the response times for Palmer. What it changes is the response times for Sutton, Palmer Fishhook, Butte, Lazy Mountain, because now we're in a position, one, we don't have to get out of an industrial park to get to a road to get where we're going or go through Palmer to get there. We could just jump on the old Glen. We could jump on the Glen. It is absolutely more strategic from a response kind of perspective. Plus, there's an element of setting up, posturing for the future where we have living quarters so that we can adequately staff stations. If you're going to throw folks on a cot, are you going to work for us or are you going to go work for AFD? So some of our recruitment retention isn't about higher wages. It's making sure the working environment is suitable too. And so if we can get them into an adequate space where they can actually have a place to sleep, because literally they're on cots right now on that station at Industrial Park, which is not possible. It's fine. I mean, I guess.
It's not ideal.
It's not ideal. And the thing is, we're competing with Anchorage for the same work hours. So that's a consideration for us because that's a highly technical skill, right? So that's an example of things that we do that it improves the response times, but there's more. And then the other component to that facility is the workforce development piece. We have to be able to train to build the staff capacity for certain skills, because nobody's going to hand it to us. And so we're going to have to figure out how to go out and grow it. And so that's part of that too. And then what we will do when that station's built, we're going to sell that old facility and get it back to somebody who's going to use it for industrial purposes. And so that makes more sense. So there's a trade-off coming out on the end of this too, once we get the facility built and staff.
Don't your schools also offer some vocational training programs?
Oh, yes. Thanks for bringing it up. I think our career and technical education program is the best in the state.
I think so.
And they just continue to improve and get better. And I think some people think like career technical high school, yes, they offer those career pathways, but so does in every other area high school that we have. And so I think a lot of people don't realize that, and the superintendent could do a far better job than I could have explaining it. But they are very CTE centric, and they pay attention to those offerings and how many classes. And I can't remember how much of the Mat-Su's course offering or the number of classes taken help it, but it's a large portion of all of the classes taken by students across the state. It's really astonishing. And so our district is doing great work there.
Mike, what do you see for retail here in the Valley, say in the next 5 years? Well, anything that you could discuss, let's put it that way, because many things are confidential until something goes up. But
Well, there's definitely a attraction. Part of so if I'm already in Anchorage, just a natural extension to come here. When you think about your cost centers and having to share managers and even sometimes employees and things, a little harder to go to Fairbanks. That's really the competition as we look at that. Anchorage or Fairbanks, it's easier just to kind of come out and take transportation. And that Fairbanks really is you get to the end of the road there. It's a great city and 100,000 people. There's something to snooze at. And you've got 2 large military bases right there. So it's also very attractive. It's colder, especially today. But this is just a nice natural. If I've got 2 stores in Anchorage, typically I've got one in the north and one in the south of Anchorage.
okay.
Or if I have one, it's typically in Midtown. And then they'll open up one here in the Valley. So Echo is a good example.
Yes.
See, we got Echo, North Anchorage, you have Echo and South Anchorage, and they came here. And then as soon as you start looking, Targets come through here off once they've been put in. They're not in Fairbanks yet. But Targets can do also. So to start seeing these, usually Anchorage is going to be first. You're just not going to get around that just because of the density of the population. This is, everybody look at this with number 2. Once they're done building here or renovating a building, okay, well, where's the nice? But they don't come up here for just money. It's too expensive. Essentially, one was another country as you kill up when you're trying to talk to somebody about, well, hey, Macy's was promoted the last step. But once they get up here, they want to have a few more cost centers. We have to share those shipping, managing, all those expenses.
What about pasta?
Now, that's my understanding. It's a Three Bears kind of buffet. I don't know if in the middle of that, but for their bit customer. Yeah, I'm not sure Costa's gonna come, but Three Bears has done a hell of a job.
A lot of Kirkland products getting moved out here.
Yeah, if you remember where.
Yeah, and I do think, to mention and give, a shout out to Three Bears that did outreach. And it's nice to see what they're able to do with some of the smaller, even convenience stores. It provides some outlets in some places. Like I think, just what that store looked like when they built Houston, for example, like that's really helpful, right? Like to provide something in some of these more rural communities that, you're not going to drive in that facility to get out.
You honestly stop keeping that. I mean, if you live in Tokay, it's like coming to Anchorage for you, right? So, I mean, they don't want to, there's reason why I don't want people, so. Yeah, it's nice to be computer.
Well, and it is interesting with some of the spaces. I mean, you see some of the regional aspect of things like Lowe's and Home Depot or SBS, that when you think about all the rural communities or our road system, whether it's going, up toward Glen Allen or up north it's where they go to get their bits and services. That's not stuff you're going to order online. Now, I mean, you might order online to pick up, but you're not ordering it online to be shipped in. Like, what are you talking about?
And if I'm known, I need it now.
I mean,
I don't all the time. So when I exercise about Three Bears with their Ace Hardwares, right?
Right.
You hit a Three Bears at Ace, probably you run by 2 Three Bears before you come into Home Depot or Lowe's.
Right.
Just driving time. We're pretty smart about that.
5 years from now?
That's a good question. I'm curious to see how the population growth continues. I mean, obviously, we're seeing different trends across the state. Interested to see if that stays on the same trajectory. It does seem to be tapering off a bit. We're still growing, but maybe not at the same rate. Yeah, and I mean, it's, it's not the easiest place to live in Alaska, right? Like we see, the overall statewide population doesn't seem to grow remarkably. So it'll be interesting to see what that does, but I still think we're going to be a place where people are going to choose to live. And I think more so in the future, choose to work. And so I think that bodes well for us. So like when I heard you mention a couple of military bases in Fairbanks, when I think about other municipalities around the state, Fairbanks has a couple of military bases. You got J-Bear and Anchorage. You've got state and federal government that, let's just say, contribute to some of these municipalities. All of those things, whether it's federal military, federal government, state government, the university system, you could think of examples. We're not really benefiting from any of that on a large scale out here.
No.
And so, and we're doing okay. So I'm excited to see where that goes and what that means, because I think that says some things about us as a community and our ability to kind of determine what we want the future to be like, where it's not driven by other aspects of, in the sense of like being propped up or being contributed to in a way like that. And certainly we benefit from J-Bear being there. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure we have plenty. I know we have plenty of military members that live out here, because I was one of them at one time. So I know that that's true. But I mean, when you just think about the economics of what that looks like, and when I look at other municipalities that, benefit, just about all of the other bigger communities have that in some way that we don't. And I'm really happy to see like what Mat-Su College is doing out here, and that build out, the hospitals expanding. Like there's just I feel like we're on a good growth trajectory, and I think that's going to continue. I think for us over the next 5 years, I would say this, we've got to figure out how to not lose the qualities that cause people to want to come out here and live, work, and play, right? We want to preserve those qualities, that sense of freedom. You don't want it to be too burdensome. You want to still have the outdoor recreation. You want to have the small community character. Like those things are really important. And so we've definitely got to spend some time figuring out how do we preserve that.
I have to say, this is a rethink for me, because 20-some years ago, when my husband and I bought our property 25 years ago on the North Shore, Big Lake, Fred Meyers wasn't there. We stopped at Cars. We stopped at Blockbuster Videos. Right, old Blockbuster. And we zoomed out. Occasionally, we had to have stopped at Spinard Builder Supply. And Don, you are making me rethink the Map Valley. And I thank you for doing that, really.
I would say if you go to last weekend, we were at the pond hobby tournament.
Oh,
Yeah, so it was probably like 16 rents out there, and they're all sponsored. Just look at the sponsors. That just tells you the people that are out here, that are thinking about, that are working in this area or living in this area. But it's companies like Hillcourt, STG, Freebird. I mean, the sponsors that they had, it just tells you on the small local fundraiser, you got a lot of big names. So it's interesting to see that
They're coming to the Met Valley. Yes, they are coming to the Met Valley.
you don't see a Hillcourt building out here. But, maybe one day you will. But I tell you what, you've got a lot of workers that are out here.
Yeah, and a lot of those entities, businesses, nonprofits, they're all like the state fair's doing well. I mean, there are a lot of different people that are doing well that are contributing to what makes it all work. And that's what's really exciting to see, right? It's not like we're hitting on all cylinders in one area, and not everyone's tried to do it all. And so I think, and we've talked about a number of different groups today that are contributing in different ways. Like that's what's fun to watch. Like that's one of the benefits of this job, is you get to see a lot of that, and you get some insight into what they're doing, and you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. I mean, we're about to open the Gateway Visitor Center here this spring. I'm interested to see what that looks like for stops and visits within the valley, because I would argue it will be the best visitor center in the state of Alaska. We use federal funds to build the majority of that. So it wasn't local taxpayer dollars for the most part. And it was just opportunistic, but it's been a dream for 20 years. And so I know some people would probably tell you, well, that's a thing of the past. They don't exist anymore. And I was like, I don't buy that. But what we'll do is just agree to let the numbers speak for themselves. So it opens this spring. Let's see what happens, what those visits look like, and we'll go from there. But that's a great spot. It's just kind of going to be one of those fun spring things, when they open up and sailing tour buses stop by there, and what that does to make impressions on people as we're traveling through the city.
Little RV spots everywhere. I mean, that's the venue. You come in and
Well, there's an RV campground right across the street.
you go through, and it's
No. And you got the lakes in the area.
with eyes that there's more things to do here.
It's the best view ship in the world. I mean, if you look at it, you're like, what view is going to be back? And then at some point, there'll probably be trails that go down over the, down into the flats. And that's for later. We don't only get to or so.
Do I need to move?
Want you?
You'll probably choose.
You won't commute as much. Then how about that?
Yeah, right. As we said,
We'll do it first commuters in Top Shirley.
Thank you, Mark. Real quick. Very eye-opening and makes you think a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.